Oh, hello and welcome to Weekend with Good Friends 2024, and this, the first panel on horror and the senses. It is my great pleasure to introduce our three panelists. Well, I say I'll introduce. Let me go around in turn and get you to introduce yourselves. Why should I do all the hard work? Anthony, do you want to go first?
Not really, but I will if push. I'm Anthony Lee-Dudley. I occasionally write things which find their way out into the world. I go by he, him, and you might have seen some things for Chaosium or Hypergraphic Magazine, a few little things like that.
And Camille.
Hello, so good to be here. It's interesting to be asked questions by Scott instead of led into horrifying, terrible scenarios by Scott, because usually I'm on the How We Roll podcast in our Cthulhu Pulp campaign, Two-Headed Serpent, and a bunch of other scenarios as well. And yeah, really excited to be here today and talk about horrible senses.
And finally, Graeme.
Yeah, hello, I'm Graeme. I publish scenarios and I hang around with Eat Slade Nobody doing some of their main arc, and recently been doing audio dramas as well for them. And Magnus Protocol was the last thing that sort of came up for that.
Yeah. Huh.
Well, I should then mention that I occasionally record with Grizzly Peaks Radio, but
Yes.
I don't think my first episode
yes.
comes out until the end of this year or the beginning of next year. So,
Well, let's kick off the discussion then with a nice, broad, open question. So, what are some of your favorite techniques, both that you've used or that you've experienced, for really bringing the senses alive in a game, for incorporating the senses in a horrific way? Rather than me go around and call on you like some geriatric school teacher, why don't those of you who've got something to say make yourselves known?
We've got to put our hands up. Best ways. I mean, I would start with the easy one. Just basic descriptions of what is happening to the player. Basically, visual and touch are kind of the go-to for me mostly, with sort of more visual descriptions of what they're doing and interacting with. So that's probably the easy one to start off, really. So you give a description of how things would feel and touch, and then maybe smell as well, to sort of bring people into it, and then you can start getting into the nuances of what's actually happening.
I'll jump in on smell actually, because one of the things I was thinking about in terms of my sort of experiences as a player, I don't want to give away spoilers for things, but there's a certain smell that comes up in our Congo chapter of Two-Headed Serpent that keeps kind of cropping up, and it's not led to anything totally horrifying yet, but it's kind of using sort of sensory information as clues, I think, in terms of kind of spurring on the investigators and being like, there's something unusual here. There was a certain smelling tea that would come up quite a bit,
Yes.
and my character got obsessed with it, sniffing out clues. So I think that can be a fun thing, and the way that the scenario kind of brings it back in later stages to kind of reveal more information through those senses, I think can be a really interesting hook to get people involved, and hopefully, discovering horrible things through their own curiosity later on. So
yeah, I think smell and sound particularly can be used effectively as foreshadowing when you want something to come up later on in a scenario. And you mention that the honeysuckle smell in the air, and don't mention anything else about it until later on, and then you find the honeysuckle comes back in, and it starts to tie the whole thing together.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, please carry on now.
I like spreading out through the senses when I'm writing, describing smells, tastes, even things that are a little bit hackneyed sometimes. The taste of copper in the air when there might be a lot of blood in the next room, that sort
Yeah.
of thing. You don't tell the person that's reading or the person that's playing it, there's the smell of blood in the air. You let them fill in, because then they have buy-in at that point when they're making that connection themselves. So a particular sound or a particular smell or a taste can be something that pulls players into a game, into a scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, it occurs to me that most descriptions you encounter in RPGs, both in terms of the way that people narrate stuff and what's written into scenarios, are generally sight and to some extent hearing. But do you consciously find yourself trying to draw on, or are you particularly drawn to other senses? And how do you make that work?
I like to use sort of the character's own experience. Like if they have a character with a background of some sort of like special NPC in their background, you could ask the players how they associate with that person. If there's any senses like smell in particular, like the story I wrote for the Magnus Protocol, the way the character gets into the story is through smell. They smell jasmine, and that's how they find the garden, and they get sort of trapped in this garden sort of thing. So I'd like to lead them down the garden path, literally, in that case, to the actual source. And in the story, it's actually plants that are manipulating memory. They don't actually smell the jasmine at all. They're just getting drawn in. It's like a lure. It's like they're just like acting to this sort of memory instead of anything they can actually smell. So you could do the same sort of thing with character sheets that just make sure you know your players and bring these sort of like memories to the forefront. Ask them a lot of questions about their sort of past background and experiences.
Yeah, I mean, smell there particularly, that's the evocative one, isn't it? I mean, that's if you've studied psychology, haven't you, Camille? I mean, am I right in remembering that smell is the one that is most heavily linked to memory?
Yeah, I think I'm more in counselling studies myself, so I've not looked into it particularly. But no, not at all. I did a psychology A level. I'll put it to use, damn it. Yeah, I do. I have kind of read before that smell is most strongly linked to memory, and I think particularly kind of maybe a spin on that could be that if there's perhaps a particularly traumatizing incident in the character's memory that they associate, it could be quite an unusual smell or something that you think would smell nice or sound nice or whatever, that they kind of specifically linked to a traumatic incident in their life. Like I've been listening through to the Magnus Archives at the moment, and there's a story about a Russian man who went to a really nightmarish circus and he can't hear the sound of like the organ anymore without being absolutely struck in fear. So maybe there's something particularly with longer campaigns where you kind of want to weave in your characters' backstories more. There could be something that crops up and it's like, oh, immediately like, pinpoint, they're in the story, like this is something to do with my character, what's going on here, they're part of the bigger plot. And just bringing in something like a bit of sensory information could really kind of make that click. And particularly smell, I think, could be very evocative as something that kind of psychologically does kind of trigger memories for us.
Yeah, especially if you like overpower it as well. You start to build it and really make them sick of it, and you can change it to be very pungent. And that happy memory can be something that can be a virgin to.
But it can almost be like time travel smell.
Yeah.
Just I was saying this the other day to someone that there's a particular smell of an old English pub back in the days when you could smoke in them, and I was in a combination. I was in a pub, and a certain song came on the jukebox, and it was an old-fashioned type pub, and there was the smell of the beer, and the smokers were just outside the window, so a bit of the smoke was coming through, and it was like I was back in the mid-80s in a certain pub in Winchester where I grew up, and it felt so real. So getting that across to that's the gold money shot, isn't it? It's like we
Mm.
really want to be able to pull people through like that.
I mean, you could even invoke like a flashback in a character doing something like that sort of thing. To have them really focusing on details that would be there, or how something would look in the past, in the past memories.
But obviously, check with people as well, because it could be very triggering to some people. Certain things.
Yeah, it occurs to me that there are certain combinations of scents that really, like you say, bring places to life. It's the one for me, which I think is something that you could use an awful lot in setting scenes, is that sort of generic institutional smell that you get in places like old schools and even office buildings and so on. I mean, it's something you don't smell so much now, but a very old-fashioned combination of furniture, wax, and perhaps cleaning supplies that just strikes me as being a very old-fashioned British thing, that combination, that as soon as you smell it, you know what it is. It smells like old offices, it smells like old schools, it smells like the past. Yeah. I know, are there any other combinations like that you can think of that would really kind of bring a place to life or evoke it or immediately cement it in someone's mind?
I don't know if it says a lot about my past, but say pubs is for me that sort of place. I worked in pubs, and in the morning when there weren't people in it, there's a particular smell. The sort of old beer, spilt beer, old cigarette smoke, and then covered by cleaning products, which are, the cleaners just trying to spray everywhere. When they banned smoking in pubs, everyone I knew that worked in a pub just laughed, because they said, do they not know what pubs smell like when there's not the smell of smoke to take it away?
Cover it off,
so that sort of mixture of, I suppose it's a mixture of the olfactory detritus of living, of people being somewhere. So if you're describing a particular location, think the people that would have been there using that location, what would they have been doing? And then find sort of mixtures of the smells that would come from that sort of situation. Is it a place where people cooked? Is it a place where a lot of work was done with mechanical stuff? I work in a bike shop sometimes, and the smell of oil and grease and metal and dirt, to be fair, is very it's evocative. It brings on a certain feeling,
and very specific as well, because you get those combinations in, say, a garage as well, but you'd also get the smell of petrol and diesel and so on in there that creates a very particular bouquet that cements it in that location.
To kind of add to that, to have kind of a medley of smells that kind of really evoke a place, in terms of kind of adding in that horror element, maybe you could kind of be describing that kind of well-known group of smells and kind of like evoking the place, but then there's something just slightly wrong. And they're like, and also, or you could use kind of like a strong smell, like, I don't know, say chlorine at a pool or something. I don't know, that just sprung to mind. But there's just something underneath it that's strange or just not quite right. So it's kind of just a bit warped, and that could be like an interesting clue as to like, something's not right here. That kind of hint towards something maybe more horrific.
The smell of bleach over something in a place where you're not expecting it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's like you were saying, Anthony, that the use of cleaning products doesn't take care of long-term or institutional smells or strong smells, and so that attempt to mask or clean up the smell of something horrific could just make it worse if you do have this even alien smell, or this horrific smell of the aftermath of violence and horror that just has a citrus layer over the top of it. That's just going to kind of make things worse, isn't it?
Yeah, a delicate hint of citrus over there.
Fine, fresh horror.
Yeah.
So I was just about to say, you looked like you were about to say something, Graeme, before, before I interrupted you.
Thinking about using it to show the passage of events in a place is quite interesting. Like you're using it to show like the clearing up of a past incident, so it's like showing the progression of a place almost as well. So you could probably continue that sort of idea and keep on, like say if you walk into a house and something's burning in the oven, for example, you can tell if something's happened recently or someone's left recently, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, you can instill a sense of tension in a player rather than anything else with like a haphazard incident smell or sense which is sort of lingering in a place just before a fire breaks out, or even if you're smelling that burnt toast and you get the player to think they might be having that stroke they're always fearing. So I think it's like you could play with them. I mean, I've done it recently in my own house. It's like I keep on thinking I've left my oven on, but I haven't just go through and the grill is not on, sort of thing. But I can sometimes think I can smell it and keep going through, and then you can obviously like throw in all your attics open as well. So maybe something's up there. So you can play with the person a little bit in the space with a sort of what's happening in a familiar setting. Just throw in these sort of like almost like little alarms with senses.
Yeah, one I found very useful like that. Just if it's in the wrong context and the wrong place, suddenly becomes so much worse. It's just the smell of cooked meat.
Yeah.
Or roasted meat.
I remember your description, Scott, of someone eating old Chinese food as well, like
Oh God.
past the usual date that you would eat the Chinese food, and that sort of visceral, the way you described it, the sound and the it congealing together. So the look of it, the sound of it, and the implied taste of it was. I've got quite a strong stomach, but it was close to the limit.
Nice. I'm always happy to gross people out.
Yeah.
I think the absence of you can make the absence of things as well. It doesn't have to be added things. Like the pub thing, the absence of the smoke smell changes what it is. It would tell you that it was a pub from a certain era, or one that hadn't been open for a little while, that sort of thing. If it's always stale smells rather than fresher smells, and that absence of sound as well. I had some friends that lived right next to a railway line, a main line up to London, and they also had a bridge that went over the line. So they always had cars beeping at the bridge to say, I'm coming over. And there was the rail line underneath. And they did some work on the bridge. So the bridge was shut and the line was shut. And they kept waking up in the middle of the night because there were no trains. And there was no sound of the train going through.
Yeah, it's oh, sorry. No, sorry. Carry on, Camille.
Yeah, that just kind of the absence of a sense kind of reminds me of that classic, like if you're walking through a forest and suddenly you get to a certain aspect and it's like, there's no sound here, there's no wildlife, it's all gone silent. That's such a classic kind of hint towards something's extremely wrong here. I don't know, that always gets me for some reason.
Well, except some forests are just like that. This is something that I worked into a scenario I wrote a while back called Fairyland, which is there was this pine forest where my mother used to go walking the dogs in the Scottish borders, and when I went up to visit her, I used to accompany her on these walks, and it wasn't a big forest, but you wouldn't have to go far inside before it just cut off everything from the outside world. You couldn't hear traffic sounds. You couldn't hear much in the way of wildlife. You get a few birds, but it was quiet. But also it was just the deadening effect of the pine needles on the ground. It muffled footfalls, and it was almost like going into a sensory deprivation tank. It was really unsettling.
Yeah,
Wow.
one of the reasons I really like snow as well. Like when you get that really heavy snow, the whole place becomes quite mute, and you can really like focus in on yourself. You can hear yourself breathe a lot because you don't have all the sort of background noises when going through the woods and that sort of thing. But yeah, lots of snow. I like that sort of deprivation.
Yeah, and it also occurs to me what you were talking about, Anthony, with the work on the railway lines. I had a very similar experience when I was a kid, because I was born and grew up in Hong Kong, which is an incredibly noisy place. There was the sounds that I remember, as a kid growing up with, were the sounds of traffic, but also the sounds of construction, the regular bang, bang, bang of pile drivers and everything going on in the background. It was just, it was just constant noise, even at night, but particularly during the daytime. And then my father got a job in Switzerland for a couple of years, and we went out there, and we were suddenly living in the middle of the Swiss countryside, and it was absolutely dead silent at night, and it was weeks before I could sleep because it was just too quiet. That sudden change of all the noise going away freaked me the hell out.
I just always assumed in Switzerland on the hour that the whole country would be blanketed with the sound of cuckoo clocks going off repeatedly. Apologies to any Swiss listeners or viewers. But the absence of sound in places. I used to work in the film industry in Vancouver, and we managed a place called Riverview, which is it's an old asylum, to be fair, which made it slightly creepy anyway. And if you ever watch any of the CW shows, you would have seen it. A lot of stuff got filmed there. And when the crews and things were there, it was fine. And I was often the last person in there at night locking up. Once the crews had all gone, the absence of noise just disappeared, and it just got quieter. But then also you would start to hear little things that you couldn't hear during the day when there were people around, and little shapes and things. You would notice things because it was so quiet. I'd be walking around an abandoned asylum, in the middle of the night, locking it up as the only person in it. So probably a little jumpy, but that absence of people is very noticeable. When there's no sort of human around.
Yeah, the quiet sounds. Yes.
I was literally at college yesterday. So I go into college on Thursdays. Exciting information. And I was, I think, the last person out. So I just kind of was packing up, and everyone else had left, and I was just like, this is eerie. I started thinking, wow, what if you set a horror scenario here? Like, how would that work? Like, just, like mapping out the building in my head almost. Particularly in those kind of institutional places, I think, where it's meant to be full of people and a lot going on. As soon as it's silent, it is quite creepy. Yeah.
Well, Riverview is multi-floored, and the bottom two floors and the tunnels underneath are used for filming, but the top is basically how it was left when they removed all the patients from it. So there's like half-made beds, and the kitchen. Most of the real rubbish has been removed, but it's basically how it was left. And you walk through those floors and with no one around, and you can almost start to hear. That would be a good thing to start playing in scenarios. You start to hear the sound of things that are not there but are being brought up by what you're seeing.
Almost becoming like a liminal space, almost.
Yeah. Now, Graeme, you touched on something earlier that, I think is quite interesting with role-playing games, which is The inspiration that I think a lot of us take for our games, both as players and GMs, is film and television.
Yeah.
And obviously, those present a very limited palette of senses. You might have characters talk about things that they can feel or smell or taste, but you're experiencing it vicariously through sight and sound. Things obviously change a bit when you're reading, but those may be our strongest influences. And so I think that runs the risk perhaps of shaping a lot of the descriptions that we get in games, and I think they're very sight and sound heavy. But Graeme, you touched on, you mentioned touch as one of the senses you go to most often when you're describing stuff. What is it that, or at least how do you bring that alive in the game?
Well, I mean, most horror games should be very interactive when it comes to like being hands-on, getting the players to engage with what's around them, and that sort of thing. I think it was probably an experience when I first got a dog. My dog, Bramble, is dead a couple of years now. She picked up when she was very young, she was a puppy. She found like 3 or 4 pigeons were just dead in the fields, sort of thing. We were going about, and she picked up one of these pigeons, and I was trying to get the pigeon off the bird because all the bones are quite small. They get stuck in her throat and so forth. So I was wrestling to get this pigeon off her, and I stuck my fingers through the chest of the bird, and it just like it became like putrid in my hand and just like opened up. So I always remember that being one of the most terrifying and visceral things, sort of like for horror that I sort of like drew on that sort of thing. It's quite a experience for me. So I quite like using that sort of like idea when it comes to players as well. And so when they're touching things or interacting with things, talk about textures, talk about how the sort of vibrations come through surfaces, numbing the hands, and it's like the jarring of things when they're like hitting things with metal, like the jarring of like using tools on things, being quite hands-on. I'm a model maker as well, so these things are, I mean, I use my hands all the time, or used to use my hands all the time to make props and so forth. And it's like some of the textures you get from, like, say, getting using certain glues, the smell of them, and the sort of like the tack of them on your fingers, sort of thing. It can be quite visceral and like memorable to really add these details. It's not something that you get every day, sort of thing. So when you put your fingers through like a pigeon's chest, for example, it's like you remember it, really.
So it sounds like the glove equivalent of Victor Meldrew putting his foot inside the hedgehog when he went out
Kinda,
at night.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, yeah, these sort of things stick with you, and you tend to draw on your experiences. So yeah, I guess that's where that comes from. But yeah, I like to gross things out as much as you do, Scott. So it's like I think touch is a very good one. It's like I recently found out like humans can't tell if something's wet or not. It's something they just can't do. So it's like more temperature they're gauging than anything else, and that's something I found fascinating as well.
It sounds like me with my laundry.
Yeah,
that's it. I mean, with cold clothing, if you pick up a piece of cold clothing, it just feels wet, even if it's not. And that's a fantastic way of just messing with people.
It's just weird.
Feel free to use that in your scenarios. Is it cold or is it wet? My laundry. Oh, this is the horror I go through every week.
Well, the worst thing is that one of the easiest ways, or the better ways of telling, particularly if you're like trying to find out if wood is dry, if you're trying to start a fire or something outside, is to touch it to your lips, which is it's not the most pleasant thing to do if it's something you're not sure about at all.
And something crawls out into your mouth.
Yeah. Because I'm just thinking there are foods that I don't like, not because of the flavour or the smell, but the texture of the food. And it's something that that might be an area that you could play around, something that looks perfectly normal, but when you utilize it in the way you would normally utilize it, there's something wrong with the way that it feels. Just creating that sense of not quite right again.
Yeah, I've had lots of problems with my teeth, and that's something I go to as well. I think Scott will probably join me. This one's like I
Oh
don't like
yeah.
dentists at all. I've got baby teeth. All my teeth are like small, so I have to go to the
Oh,
dentist a lot, and they sort of wear that sort of thing. I'm 42 now, so you can tell the state they'll be in from all that. And it's like I remember
jeez.
one of my teeth shattering in my mouth. It felt like eggshell in your mouth, sort of thing. So it's one of the experiences I always go to as well, using that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't had that, but I have had a couple of occasions where a tooth that's had some work on it, like a crown and so on, has just
Yeah.
broken, and I've had like half a tooth loose in my mouth, and that sudden feeling of there is something hard and sharp somewhere in my mouth where there shouldn't be is horrifying.
Yeah, the sensation of eating something soft and then chewing and biting down on something hard that's in your mouth that's not meant to be there is terrifying for me because I know it's going to be one of my teeth that's
Mm.
just at the end of its life, sort of thing.
But I mean, even outside the mouth, now there's a seg. Just finding the wrong texture while you're expecting something can be terrifying. If you were to, brush up against someone, and find their skin is tacky, or just that feeling of something that should be firm giving under your fingers. I think is just an immediate lifeline to creating that sense of, oh, shit is fucked.
Especially if what you're seeing seems normal, because I think that obviously for people with sight, that can be the sense that we tend to rely on quite heavily for knowledge and understanding. Seeing is knowing. But yeah, so in terms of kind of being able to see something that looks normal and then realize through other senses, whoa, something ain't right here. Yeah, I think that could be very compelling. It reminds me of your scenario Unland, Scott.
Oh, yes.
No spoilers there. But yeah, that's one thing I remember going at when I was listening to a playthrough of it.
But describing something like a smooth indoors floor and then describing that there's almost a granular sand shifting quality to it as someone's walking on it, those sorts of things. But when you look down, it just looks like an ordinary floor. So that changing what the senses are, so giving the different senses. I'll start again. Giving the different senses different input. And contradictory input for what's around them.
Yeah, if you're feeling pleasure and you're just watching your finger being taken off, like with a pair of like scissors or something, it's a bit of a different experience, I suppose.
But also confounding the senses and just plain confusing people with what you were talking about there with just the texture of the floor being wrong. It doesn't even have to be creepy to have an impact. If, like you said, with what appears to be a polished wooden floor and just a granular feel on it, that wouldn't necessarily trigger a fear response, but you would still be thinking, what the hell is going on?
And it can signify change as well. In The Path, the short story that I put into the Blasphemous Tome, the main person is walking through, and it's very hard. The ground is rock. They're going through a cavern until they reach the destination room, and then it changes to sand. So it changes the whole feel of where their destination is. It's not the same place as the bit that they've gone through.
Yeah, back to your limited space there, really.
We've covered most of the main five senses, but have you ever found any interesting ways, or are there any particularly memorable examples you can think of games of taste coming into play?
Yeah, yes and no. Yeah, it's a hard one to do, but I have used it. Again, I use it more in short stories than anything else. I accidentally said one of the characters in the same Magnus Protocol thing was tasted burnt aniseed in his mouth.
Oh.
And the wild theories that popped up on the internet about why he was tasting it was kind of crazy. And it really made me want to say, well, I really want to put that into scenarios now, because it really did make them question almost everything. There was like 3 or 4 strange, like almost dissertations that appeared on the sort of subject. And I didn't really think too much about it at the time, but I wish I had thought a bit more about why he was tasting that particular taste, and that sort of thing. But it was like they really went deep on it, sort of thing. So it's something I really do want to explore more, as taste. But yeah, it's a hard one to pull off, I think, unless
I
you really
think I've
submerge someone in an atmosphere.
I think I've mainly used it as an adjunct to smell.
Hmm.
So when
Mm.
something that is extremely redolent or thick in the air goes beyond smell and becomes something that you can actually taste.
Mm.
In Fugazi, the editor for it, Scott. So you might remember there was the
Yes.
perfume in the jungle, and it got stronger and stronger as you got closer to, and where it goes from transitions from smell into being able to sort of taste it in the air and getting through the respirators and things.
Sorry, you just made me think of William Burroughs in Naked Lunch. There's a section in there which always sticks with me, which is, did I ever tell you about the man who taught his asshole to talk? And there's just this description of this increasingly sentient and vocal digestive tract, and Burroughs describes the voice at some stage as this sort of deep rumbling voice coming out of this guy's ass, and he says that it was this low bubbling viscous sound, a sound you could taste, and that's just stuck with me.
That's pretty nice.
I'd quite like to do that to a player, actually. Give them their own arsehole can talk to them, but no one else can hear it.
I think in terms of taste, I can't think of any kind of like examples from scenarios I've played in. Nothing's coming to mind, but I guess in terms of kind of confounding the senses or kind of something unexpected happening, because there is such a connection between smell and taste. It could be quite interesting to have, I don't know, a player kind of like is about to drink or eat something and it all smells great, yeah, looks great, lovely, and then when they taste it, it's like rotten, fetid, or just tastes really metallic and strange, or just something's just really not right about it. And I mean, it's at that point where it's like, I've consumed this, like that's personal, yeah, I think that could be quite horrifying.
Yeah, that whole violation of the bodily envelope. I mean, we tend to think of that in terms of wounds, but it's very much there in terms of ingestion as well. And you can definitely play with that.
Yeah, it's a massive horror trope. It's actually very hard for me to get players to eat and drink in my games. I'm
Yeah.
not sure about you. It's one of these things that's
It's
plagued me.
perfectly normal. No.
Yeah, if you describe something as this perfectly normal meal, would you like to eat it? Then
Suspicious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had that happen in a game I ran recently. I won't talk about this scenario because it's a bit of a spoiler for it, but the characters, or rather the players, were very suspicious of food and drink. And after about, I think, 24 hours in this location, I was just sort of saying, are you sure you're not drinking any fluid? Because you're getting really badly dehydrated. This is going to start having really bad effects on you.
Yeah. It's one of these hard things to do. I used it once, I think, well, in my lifetime. It's like I wrote a scenario called Here Be Dragons, and it's a Wild West scenario where they're sort of being contracted. It's like a vigilance committee are going after this thing they think is a dragon, going up to this mountain, Mount Whitney in the Sierra Mountains, to find out what this thing is and to kill it or bring back proof of what it is. And they meet this guy who had it as a a sort of like circus act. He kept this dragon or whatever it was as a circus act, and that's how he got it into this story. And it escaped and caused all this mayhem. Anyway, he took it up the mountain, but he's always constantly drinking, and what he's drinking is actually space mead. And
Oh, wow.
if you don't drink it and you get taken into space, you're kind of screwed a little bit. So it's one of those sort of backwards sort of logic things, and yeah, not many people want to share his weird whiskey, basically, and it can cause a lot of problems. But it's very hard to get people to do it.
Mm. Now, I mean, there are obviously more senses than the 5 that we tend to describe as the 5 senses. I mean, I'm not talking about ESP. I'm talking about all those ones that we just sort of accept, like our sense of balance and the sense of temperature. And one of my favorites, proprioception, our sense of our own body. Are there any ways that you've encountered or you've used that have brought those into play and use them in strange ways, or any ways you can think of to use them in strange ways? Ooh, blank faces.
I think I have had the obvious one with proprioception is an alien hand, the alien hand
Yeah.
syndrome type thing, where something happens in the middle of the in the night, and you wake up and you find that you've got a broken pencil stub in your hand and written something down, or it's something where something's sort of taken control, or something else is giving agency to your parts of your body, or you can feel something that isn't there. Your body can touch something or feel something that isn't there, and it's not where what you're expecting when you're there. But it's again,
Yeah.
it's a difficult one to get into a written description, I think.
What was that Clive Barker story? I mean, it's like 40 years since I read it, so my memories are vague. Was it The Body Politic, where parts of the body start becoming autonomous and rebelling against the whole, like the hands of someone just start rebelling against the body as a whole? It just maybe what you said there just made me think of that.
It's almost Evil Dead style sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
the numbskulls for people of a certain age who read comics in England.
What's the numbskulls?
Oh God!
It was
something I hadn't thought of for years.
It was a British comic, or a story in a British comic that had these little creatures that lived inside this person that they were the numbskulls, and there was the brain ones, and there was the body one, and there was the and they often argued with each other and got into difficulties because they were not all working in the same way. And I remember thinking about it years later and thinking, that's actually quite creepy. That's
It
the
really is.
idea that there's multiple things that are claiming precedence over various parts of your body and brain.
Yeah, because I think with proprioception in particular, you could really mess with that because we just take it for, and I guess this sort of plays in with a lot of our fears of disease and disability and so on, in that we take bodily autonomy and bodily control, just for granted. The fact that, our minds and our bodies are fully integrated, and when that starts breaking down, both in real life and in fiction, it's terrifying.
Yeah, you can use it in lots of ways, actually. I mean, I'm thinking about it now, I think we used it in 8 Slade once. I don't think it's released yet, so I can't really say too much about it. It does happen to one of the players where he's uncomfortable or unfamiliar in his own body, and he's sort of tripping over himself and that sort of thing. And I was thinking about the consume likeness spells and all that sort of thing, not being able to control the sort of limits or dimensions of your own sort of like body, I guess. So you're always sort of like knocking things over, or it could be a nice tell, for example, for someone who's just transmuted into something else, that sort of thing. you've got the whole witch and the cat thing as well. It's like, how do they deal with that? Are they good cats, or are they stumbling around, like not understanding how to be cats, sort of thing? So you can play with it quite a lot in that sort of plane, I guess.
And I guess there's quite a lot of body swapping in
Yeah,
Lovecraft as well, between the shadow out of time and the thing on the doorstep. And so what being in an alien body, or not even a monstrous body, but just a different human one, is going to do to your sense of proprioception and your balance and everything like that. It's going to mess with you badly.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I have too few arms or too many, one of the two.
Yeah, I mean, imagine it's like you have like missing a limb, and then all of a sudden it's back, and you can't use it properly, even if it's a phantom limb, and you can see or feel this phantom limb. It can actually affect the real world, and it's not you that's controlling the phantom limb. Like
I was just thinking about phantom limb syndrome actually. When Angeline was talking about like alien limb syndrome. Imagine if there's a scenario where you started having like phantom limb syndrome, but it was for a limb that just didn't exist before. It's not like you've lost a limb and you still feel it. It's you just start getting that sense. And yeah, you're like, but I don't have a limb there. What is that? And then maybe it starts kind of growing from there. So it's kind of like a warning sign.
Figuratively and literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be kind of freaky. So, if anyone wants to use that idea, feel free.
Well, and that kind of makes me think again of the Shadow Out of Time and the Yithians. So, for those who haven't read the story, I mean, these are creatures from humanity's, well, long before humanity's, the Earth's dim and distant past, who send their consciousness through time and exchange it with that of other creatures, particularly people, and possess them for a length of time to learn about that era of history in the world, and then swap back. But the person who's been swapped sort of has their memory wiped or suppressed when they go back. But I wonder whether you could have fun with one of the giveaways that this has happened, one of the senses that things have gone wrong, is that your sense of proprioception has changed. You've spent X number of years in this very alien body with tentacles that's cone-shaped that moves around on cilia and stuff like that. And now you're going back, trying to adapt to being human again, and everything's just wrong.
I've often wondered, I think I mentioned earlier, I only have one eye that works, and I've often wondered what would happen if suddenly the technology arrived that it could be replaced and I could see again out of both eyes, because I lost my eye when I was 13 and I'm 55, so it's a big old chunk of time that I've got used to only having one eye, and to suddenly have something that works again. So, someone that lost a limb, and it must be very disconcerting to suddenly have something that is an approximation of the limb that you used to have, like prosthetics and things.
Well, go on, sorry.
No, sorry, I was just going to mention in passing that, yes, I did actually write a scenario in which an NPC who lost a limb during the Great War is exposed to something that grows it back inexplicably. And I mean, that's the least of his problems, but it certainly tends to freak the players out when they encounter him, and he's got that extra leg that they weren't expecting.
Yeah, I was going to mention head transplants. Like, it was going to happen
Oh,
recently, and it didn't happen. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they announced they were going to try it, and then it didn't happen for whatever reasons. I think it was there was advances in the guy's condition, the sort of like disease he had. There was like advancements in solving it, so he didn't want to chop his head off and stick it on someone else instead, which is understandable. But imagine like just getting put onto a different body. Just your head just transplanted wholly onto something else. It could be very disconcerting, sort of thing.
Well, but when there were all sorts of experiments, there was, I can't remember his name, a Russian scientist in the 1940s or 50s who did that with dogs.
Yeah. The Soviets did some horrific stuff back then.
Oh god, yeah.
But yeah, it's imagine having to share your body with a head that's like transplanted onto you, and you have to wrestle with just the mere motor functions of like picking something up because they want to do something else with it. It's,
Or a scenario where all of the players are
Are
heads
one.
that have all been grafted onto one body,
Yeah.
and they have to try and work out what's happening. So some sort of monstrous body, and
No,
then
it's like,
try
no, go this way. Go this way.
and split the party now. Yes.
It's gonna turn into Chuckle Brothers to you, to me.
Yeah.
There was a really cheesy horror science fiction film in the 60s or 70s. What was it? The Two-Headed Monster or Two-Headed Man or something like that, which was exactly that. It was someone who'd had a second head transplanted onto his body and the two were fighting for control. I mean, it's like 50 years since I've seen this. I remember it as being pretty shitty, but yeah, yes. Something that you touched on as well earlier, Anthony, was the denial of senses. I mean, even going beyond just it's quiet, it's too quiet. Are there? I mean, certainly it seems you can get a lot of horror out of plunging players into situations where their characters can't perceive things the way they normally do. Maybe things are just too loud for them to hear stuff. Even simple stuff like gunfire having deafened them temporarily. Places that are completely dark. I mean, absolutely dark. Just using those to amplify the sense of horror or helplessness. Are there any occasions or any examples you've come across with those that have really stood out to you?
I wanted to do a scenario like this. It never actually happened, but I do want to do it. Still, I've got the idea for it. So it was. I'm a big fan of Cloverfield, and that sort of Monster Mash movie. And I had this idea of like a dysfunctional family who's in a Holiday Inn, and the Holiday Inn just one night collapses because of this horrific invasion, and they're stuck in this sort of rubble. It's all dark, you can't see anything, and there's just things scuttling about in the ruins with them, and they have no light and anything like that, and they have to find each other just by noise and sound and talking, shouting to each other. You have to try and find their way out of this sort of ruined hotel just by touch and shouting, and maybe finding the odd helpful thing here and there from what they sort of find in the sort of like cracks in between the ruins. And there's obviously these things sort of scuttling around, which are the invasion. And that would just be like an opening scene before they come out and discover what's happened to the Holiday Inn itself. And that sort of thing. It's like my dad's deaf, and I always remember him telling a story about when they were just about to get married, my mum and him, and he went off a cliff in a tractor because he couldn't hear my granddad because he's deaf, so he couldn't hear him saying like stop or anything like that, and he just plunged off the sort of the edge of this cliff. He went this like 20-25 feet down. He lost an inch. Yeah, lost an inch in height. And got pins up and down his body and all that sort of thing. So that kind of stays with you, sort of thing. So it's like, yeah, you got to be careful. Losing that one sense you take for granted is very difficult. So yeah, I don't think my mum and dad's marriage is legal because he was on so much drugs at the wedding.
Wait, is that a Get Out?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe I'm still thinking about the 5 heads on one body idea from earlier, but I don't know if it would be too contrived, but maybe there could be a scenario where you have 5 characters, like 5 player characters. They can all speak or kind of hopefully interact with each other in some way, but they only are able to rely on one sense each. So it's almost the party has to work together to be like, okay, what does this person see? How can they translate that to someone else? Like, what does this person hear? How can they share that? And what does this person? I don't know. That could be ridiculous.
Who draws the short straw and ends up with taste?
Oh no!
Yeah.
Well, they're the only ones who can enjoy food, right? So that's not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
We need you to check
you're
this
going
taste.
around
I don't
licking.
wanna. I don't wanna.
You're just going around licking everything on behalf of everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Enjoy this perfectly normal, okay,
Yeah.
lovely
Yeah.
food. It'll be great.
There
Yeah,
is-
particularly
maybe-
particularly if they don't get on with the person who's got smell.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll love
Yeah,
I
this.
thought you said this was okay.
Yeah.
Maybe some kind of scenario where, yeah, like the players are kind of having to help each other out with senses somehow.
Oh,
could
yeah.
be interesting.
Yeah.
There is actually a podcast that does that, Malevolence by Harlan
Oh, yeah.
Guthrie, where the main character doesn't have eyes, and there's this entity that's attached to him that act as his eyes. It's like it's an audio trick to get to one character to describe to the other character what's happening really in an audio format. But it works quite well, and it's like they have to do that sort of double act to try and get around in the world. So it is out there, and everyone seems to love that as well. It's pretty good. So. That's one to check out.
Yeah. Oh, we recorded with Harlan on Ain't
Yeah,
Slade. and
you did, yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
I think with the absence of senses, I was thinking along the lines of the way you describe things, because obviously verbal description is how this is, or written description is how this is going to come across to people. So describing the increase in a sense or the decrease in a sense can create two very different feelings. So if you talk about light simply, so light fading, it tells the players that there is the darkness is coming, nighttime is coming. If you talk about what they can see decreasing and what they can see increasing, and the same with most of the other senses as well. It's I think I tend to rely on descriptive language when I'm writing, and the rather than saying the obvious, saying things that make the players make the link themselves. So if I want it to be very down, I'll describe a fire in terms of what it doesn't do. It doesn't reach the corner of the rooms, and it doesn't warm you through. If I want it to be upbeat, or the fire's crackling merrily and you can feel the warmth all the way through. So just changing the way you describe the sense. So the sound is getting louder, the sound is getting less, the sound is big and bright, and the sound is in the background. Yeah, it's not an easy trick, I don't think. Otherwise we'd all be doing that.
Well, I remember
but it can be very effective.
Yeah, your World War II scenario you ran with us, or World War One, the absence of horses that you were.
Yeah. That's it's not. It was going to be renamed that because of something that happens. But
I remember.
Yeah, there's a lot of the description in that. It's World War One in the trenches at the Battle of Messines Ridge, and the journey across no man's land, and it's a descent. It starts off quite bright and lively behind the lines, and then the way I describe it gets you play up certain aspects of smell and vision and what's around you, and it becomes grayer. I try and make that's probably the best way to do it. I try and make the descriptions grayer as you get closer to the trench itself where you're going to.
Something you said there, and I don't know what it was, it got me thinking about because you've got entities in the mythos like the Migo who have a propensity for ripping people's brains out and putting them in cylinders or putting them in mechanical bodies or different bodies. And the cylinders have got different attachments that you put on that restore senses or give senses. the Miko obviously are very alien creatures and perceive things in different ways. And I was just wondering what happens when you have a human brain that's put into a construct that has inputs into their brain for senses that humans don't have, and what that does to the mind.
Yeah, I'm feeling very purple, and I'm not sure
Yeah.
why.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Seeing the color magic sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, it's not even just being able to perceive colours or so on, but I'm just. I mean, clearly this is like it's one of these things you encounter in trying to come up with horrific things, which is fundamentally you're limited in your imagination by human experience. So everything that you can put into a weird or cosmic or horrific game is somehow a recombination or an amalgamation of your own personal experiences or the things that you've encountered. You can mix them up in strange and interesting ways, but coming up with something that is genuinely alien or novel is pretty well impossible, because that's just the way our brains work. And so just the idea of trying to describe this sense that humans do not have, that there is no mapping for in the human brain, that it would never even occur for us to have, maybe something like being able to directly experience the warping of space-time through gravity or something like that, as a separate sense. I mean, that would be absolutely, I mean, mind-blowing in the game if you could pull it off. But it would also be very difficult.
Well,
I think Larry Niven said, I remember reading something that he was talking about making aliens. It's really difficult as a human being to make an alien that is genuinely alien and isn't actually a human being inside, a written skin suit.
you made
Because
cat people. Come on.
yeah, yeah, or copy things that are around, and but yeah, it is a tricky
Well,
one.
we perceive a lot of things we're not meant to perceive all the time as humans these days through technology. So I'm not sure you couldn't perceive it as a whole new like revelationary experience, but you can put it in terms of what you can understand. Like we can see infrared now, we can see a lot of things like that we're not meant to or not meant to be able to perceive, but we put them into our own terms. And I think that's probably the best way of doing it, because well, it's the only way of doing it, I guess. Really, you can have this bizarre psychedelic experience that's just like almost like a vibration of the real experience, sort of thing, an echo of it, and just sort of take to that next level. Like most cultists like try to take themselves beyond the experience of humans, don't they? When they're trying to like exert themselves, and it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? Sort of thing. They're trying to push up past the limits of the human experience into something else. So it's something you could do with that, perhaps.
But I mean, the thing is, I mean, even with psychedelic experience and occult practices and so on, fundamentally they're all filtered through the limitations of human senses,
Oh yeah.
and so they may be perceiving novel experiences and creating novel experiences in your brain, but that's there's still applications of the same basic senses that we've always had.
Yeah, that's just the. I mean, how you can't really get past that.
Yeah.
That basic assembly.
I mean, even understanding other animal senses is difficult for us. I read that the dog's sense of smell has an element of being able to smell through time, because they can path where people have been for like 24 hours before by the decrease in the scent. And our sense of smell is nowhere near that good, but they can do it with individuals. They can work out what time in the last 24 hours an individual was in this place by their sense of smell. And that's even that's tricky to get your head around as a human.
Yeah, actually, sharks are a good one for that because the way that they hunt and the way that they perceive the world is very, very different from our experience. For a start, sight isn't a huge thing to them. They can see, but it's not a big part of how they perceive the world. Famously, they can detect minute quantities of blood miles off, just quantities of blood that it would never even occur to us would be perceptible are very obvious to them. But the one that always impressed me, just because it's a sense we don't have, is they've got, I can't remember what they're called, but they've got special receptors in the front of their head that allow them to detect electromagnetic fields. And that's a big part of how they perceive the living world around them, that they can perceive these shifts in electromagnetic fields and use those to hunt, which is amazing.
Even down to being able to pick out Chief Brody's family through several movies and hunt them down even when they're on land.
As a
They can
dog
smell
friend,
through
like,
time.
hey, hey, dog, where have these guys been in the last 24 hours? I want to map out their activities. I
Dog
would
and
watch
shark.
that buddy movie.
Yeah. That's an Evan Dorkin title for the future, isn't it? Dog and shark.
Oh, yes.
That's the sort of thing he would excel at.
One thing I was thinking about earlier, just in terms of funky things with the senses, is synesthesia. So kind of like the crossover of different senses, like I don't know, being able to associate certain colors with certain smells, or I know there's a few different types of synesthesia. That could be quite interesting. Like if, I don't know, suddenly a character was gifted with a form of synesthesia where it could help them kind of like investigate clues or kind of like put things together, or make certain connections between certain senses. I don't know if that could be like an interesting thing
Like a
to
pulp talent or
explore.
something.
Yeah.
Well, it's something that I've had in my idea book for ages, and I've never worked out what to do with it, which is something related to synesthesia and the King in Yellow, just the perception of yellow through the other senses, and how exposure to the play creates this weird kind of synesthesia where suddenly you're tasting yellow and hearing yellow and smelling yellow just because it's suffused your consciousness.
Maybe someone already had.
Have you tasted the yellow sign?
We're back to the five
It's
heads
awful.
and the one doing mouth, aren't we? Taste again. It's
like you could have a character who already has synesthesia. They've got quite set up, associations, but then they all start changing. It's like, why is this yellow now? That wasn't yellow before. Why is this also yellow? It's all yellow. That could be quite a change.
There's a song in that, isn't there?
Yes.
One thing I did think about in my Cosmic Dark scenario, Flickers, I do play with having it's kind of ripped off of Nightmare, the kids' TV show,
I love that
where
show.
some of the players, if they separate, they can go into places and they can't see, or they can't see everything. But someone watching on a camera, for some reason, can see other things in the room, and so they can't be totally reliant on their own senses. They have to be relying on other people's input. No, there's someone standing there. There's definitely but there's no one here. No, they're really, and the players that are in the location where they can't see the things in the room, it is quite effective. They do get quite there's definitely a reaction to, I can't see what's here. Someone's telling me there's something here, but I can't see it, and it's not a good thing. So you can take senses away from people and allow other people to use them.
There's a game out quite recently, right? Lethal Company, that I've not played yet, but it just reminded me of that because there's usually one player who remains like in the kind of main control room and kind of describe what's coming up and what's going on. I also thought it'd be interesting in a scenario where maybe the player in the control room has some bad motivations. I don't know, like so halfway through the game, it kind of turns out, oh, they're actually trying to lure us somewhere. What do we do? Do we rely on them to keep kind of, because they can tell us what's there, but also what are they up to? That could be an interesting kind of scenario, nice bit of betrayal.
Yeah, I remember Scott being the company man, doing exactly that. An alien.
Yes.
Oh dear.
So,
My favorite.
yeah. So that's
By the way, for those of you listening and watching, if you do have any questions, please do chip them in the chat. David's monitoring it at the moment and will pass on any questions to us that you may have. Now, building on some of the things that I think we've been edging around, what do you do with situations, or can you think of any great examples of situations where the characters just simply can't trust their senses? I mean, there are obviously all sorts of reasons why this might happen, from delusions to drugs to weird magic. But are there any fun or weird or scary examples you can think of the senses being completely confounded?
I can, but I can't talk about it because Camille.
Oh,
Ah, good cliff. No spoilers, no spoilers. I can take my headphones off for a sec.
I
Sounds
think.
like I'll.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it sounds like I'll have an example in a few weeks.
Yeah. I was going to say some of the cosmic dark stuff that Graeme's put out. The scenarios for that. Some of those have got some really good examples of how senses get messed around, and off the top of my head, I can think of touch gets used, and sound, and I think maybe even taste as well.
And also chronoception.
Yes,
The sense of the passage of time. He really messes with that in entertaining ways, and I enjoy
yeah,
that.
definitely.
I know in more than one scenario, and at least I think 3 of them, there are strange relationships with time.
Yeah, and the whole things being where they're not supposed to be in your body and around, and things like that. It's they're really good, but I don't want to go into any detail because he's not fully released them all yet, has he? So
No.
I've also thought of one, but it might be a bit spoilery. So I don't know. Should I just kind of give a warning?
Be vague about where it comes from.
Well, there's a scenario I've played in where there is kind of an element of time travel involved, and I think that just thinking about it from the character's perspective, having kind of it's basically my character was in a certain situation, went traveling back through time and landed not too far back from where she'd begun, and was kind of going into the same situation again with no one else realizing that she'd time traveled and she knew what she knew, of horrifying things to come, and just sitting with what that would feel like and what that would mean for that character in terms of, oh God, I know all this horrible stuff is happening and is going to happen, and if I say anything about it, nobody's going to believe me. And just particularly in the scenario she was in, going into a sort of an asylum setting. So there's kind of the disempowerment there as well. So it's kind of a horrifying thing to consider, as how your character ends up kind of stuck, perhaps even in a cycle of just being kind of disbelieved, and how kind of gaining new experiences but going back to the same thing every time. And yeah, I don't know. That's something that I still think about.
I think chrono perception. Gatsby and the Great Race.
Oh yes,
that's very good at messing with you. I played that with Skype of Cthulhu on their 300th podcast many years ago, and you get thrown spoilers if you've never played it, but you get thrown between different places, and you change as well. So your character changes, the way you look changes. All the different things can change. So it really actually fits all of our criteria that we're looking at, and it is a really good example of the way it's done. I mean, you have to have multiple keepers to run it, but it's a fantastic example of what messing with what your character is, what your avatar is, the way you're perceiving what's going on is. It's a fantastic example.
Yeah, I mean, when I played that at a convention about 20 years ago, it was one of the first runs of it. Yeah, there were, I think, 5 keepers. Is that complicated?
It works brilliantly online as well, because when you get thrown into the sort of limbo rooms and someone's operating the whatever system you're using, it's really easy just to move someone from one instance to another. And it really does feel very disconcerting when you're suddenly sat in a room and there's no one else around, and then somebody else comes in from one of the other rooms and you sit there going, well, what have you done? And then you're gone and you're somewhere else again.
It's pretty interesting.
Sounds like a horrendous online conference.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got one scenario like that. It's time travel. It's I've got it was like a play on the Gluttony Club, the Darwin thing. I had them become a cult and dragging like extinct animals through time to eat them, and that sort of thing. And they end up killing one of their members, and she sort of echoes through times as ghosts. And you start off in the modern time, you go to the 1800s, on like a boat that's stranded in the sort of Pacific, Atlantic Ocean, and from there you jump backwards in time, and again you end up in an asylum, but it's a film set, and they don't know it's a film set, so they think it's a proper asylum. And one of the characters shot one of the guards, one of the guys who's trying to drag him onto the set to do his part as an extra, and then that cut is shouted across the set, and everything changes, sort of thing. so it's one of those messing with time sort of thing.
But I think, I mean, delusions in general are a great way of introducing all sorts of not just weird sensory inputs, but messing with sensory inputs in ways that'll heighten the horror. You were talking before, Graeme, about the importance of or the use of smell as a motif to sort of hint at things and make connections. And you could, I think, when you've got delusions and through drugs or insanity in the game, then bring those things back in, in ways that are not real, can have interesting effects. Like, I think you were talking about honeysuckle as something that was, or jasmine as
Yeah.
being like a warning sign. If you suddenly if you find that your partner is using a new body wash and you think it smells of jasmine, I mean, as a delusion, that could lead to quite horrible things.
Yeah, you can plant quite insidious thoughts and change people's perspectives of what's going on, really. It's one of the things that's kind of underused in Call of Cthulhu is like the GMs can actually mark the sheets of the players and with permanent changes to them. And I always thought it was a fascinating idea, but I hardly ever see it done. I suppose it's more of a long form thing, but I think it's something that's like sorely underused, really. So if you add to the sheet, like just in their beliefs, like every time you smell jasmine, you have this thought that sort of like crosses your mind of this character, or something like that. It could be quite instilling and take the character in interesting directions.
Okay, well, I think we're coming fairly close to the end of the discussion. I'll just remind anyone watching, if you do have any questions, please do kick them in. But sorry. Are there any particular techniques or cool bits of narration or gemming that have really brought these things to life for you, or that you've been particularly proud of in your own work, that have fallen outside the bounds of what we've covered so far?
I suppose I used to help run LARPs, and someone in one of the LARPs wanted to do a séance. So I ran the séance while the rest of the LARP was going on. And while describing what they made contact with, initially I played on very positive sensory input. So there was light, there was the sounds were harmonic and not threatening, questioning, contemplative, and used all of the kind of positive words to describe that. When I think back on it now, describe what we would feel as positive inputs: warmth, light, sound which is harmonious and not disharmonic, and things like that. And then at the last moment, I just flipped it and smashed my hand down on the table and went really gruff. Something's seen you, come with me, and took the player aside. And the player came up to me afterwards and said it was the most fun, which speaks about him, but also, the most involving LARP experience that he'd had, because he felt all of those things. So I think using descriptively the positive aspects of sensory input, sound, that use touch, sound, smell, vision, creates a positive atmosphere. And then you can flip it once you've created it. Once you've created the high, you can throw a low in straight afterwards.
Talking of kind of sorry.
No, sorry.
Talking of setting up in a kind of an actual real in the room, real life environment kind of way. That just reminded me of a game I've played a couple of times, 10 Candles, that I've just played like in person with friends, and how that kind of sets up a lot of kind of sensory input into kind of almost the horror and the kind of solemnness of the scenario, depending on where you take it. Because if anyone's unfamiliar with the game, it is kind of like a survival horror game where you're probably not going to survive. So there's that kind of sense of nihilism. And you do light 10 tea lights at the start of the game, and that kind of symbolizes one scene. And after every scene, someone puts out one of the tea lights. And I just find it very evocative in the way that you start with that darkness, because it's very low light, and then it just keeps getting darker and darker and darker. So it's kind of like signifying this is coming towards the end. And then also just because you burn bits of paper as well, sort of like particular traits of your character or certain things throughout the game you play, you burn that as well. So you kind of get that smell input of the burning as well. Just a very, very evocative smell. And also, just kind of the burning of the candles as well. So I think it really puts you into that space and really makes you kind of feel a part of it, and you're sort of part of something significant with the people you're at the table with. So I think that, as much as I play online mostly, I think sometimes having, as well as the descriptive sensory information for your character, anything you can actually bring in real life could be very evocative as well.
Yeah, because I do almost all my gaming online these days, but certainly when I did a lot more face-to-face gaming, I remember when I ran my first campaign of Cult, I tried to create an atmosphere through all sorts of things. We play by candlelight for a start. And I'd burn frankincense just to sort of get that almost liturgical atmosphere into the room, and play droning ambient music and stuff like that very softly in the background. I never went the whole hog and started bringing special effects in to try to engage the player senses like that. I know some GMs really like doing it, and it can work online as well. But I mean, personally, I find when I'm GMing, I've got enough to think about without trying to manage a soundboard or something like that. But different strokes for different folks. But yeah, that sense of actually engaging the player's senses rather than the character's ones is something that, I think you can have a lot of fun with.
You can even do something like, for this game, you will need to bring a candle, or you'll need to bring this certain item or something. And it's like, okay, now do this. So it's kind of almost, engaging that player physically and kind of bringing them into the zone and kind of maybe connecting them more with their character as well. Because while the character's doing this, the player's doing this, and kind of really forming that connection. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, one of my friends
Yeah.
did a game where a homebrew game, and he used as the resolution system. He had a big bag of Chinese fortune cookies, and so every time there's a question, you ate the cookie and read the fortune, and that was the mechanism. So the
No
taste of
way.
fortune cookies for me means that something came out of an alley and ran me over. So there we
Classic
that's
fortune.
brilliant.
yeah.
That's very good.
Truck, right? Oh.
This one just said splat.
Yeah.
Oh no.
And one thing that you were saying earlier, Anthony, resonated with me as well, which is a trick I have used for engaging the senses of the players, particularly convention games, but just face-to-face games, which is, I mean, a simple thing, but at moments where there's been sudden violence or something jumping out of the darkness unexpectedly or something like that, I have very much sort of slammed my hand or even the book onto the table, just so you get that sense of a jump scare, that immediate jarring of the senses. And it's not something I do very often, but it can be hugely effective.
I ran Palatine Light. It was at Concrete Cow, and there's a bit in it where the mob boss is talking to the players and getting them involved. So I decided to stand up and walk around the table and behind the players, a bit like in what's the Kevin Costner film?
Oh yes, yeah. The Untouchables.
The Untouchables, where he's
Al Capone with the baseball bat. Yeah,
walking around the back behind them. So just wandering around the back and not doing anything, but just talking to them from behind, and just them having to sort of look round a little bit can create. Obviously, you pick your audience, but I mean, I know most of the people that go to the Cow regularly, so it was that's quite good.
That's something I've seen Kiri Birch do a lot in convention games. He's really good at that. He uses his own physicality in moving around the room, and at times it's almost like being stalked by a predatory animal. It's great. Well, I think we're almost out of time. Are there any things that we've not covered that you just wanted to bring in that we skipped over, or should we start looking at wrapping things up now?
I think the only thing I wanted to just re-emphasize is when you're running a game, if you're using a description of a sense, don't go to the obvious description. Make it a bit more subtle. Let the players come to the conclusion rather than push the conclusion to the players. So find that middle ground where you're describing something, like I said, the coppery taste in the air. Don't tell them there's the taste of blood in the air. Tell them there's a coppery taste. Most people have watched enough TV shows and things to pick up the coppery taste as a hint. So let them come to the conclusion rather than push the conclusion to them.
I think
And I
one thing.
say,
Sorry, I
oh,
keep doing this to you, Scott.
no, I think it's because I'm lagging very slightly.
Okay.
I was just going to say, building on that, just as a little addendum to it, another thing that I found very effective is just using the unexpected. So when you encounter a monster that looks absolutely loathsome, you expect to have the smell perhaps described in very unpleasant terms like rotting flesh or effluent or something like that. And I've had a lot of success with freaking players out where I've just described it, something like that as smelling like custard and wallpaper paste. And, it's just yeah. Yeah.
On its own planet, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
Sorry, Camille, you were about to say.
Yeah, just kind of building a bit on what Anthony was saying about don't just spell it out, kind of just like lead them into it. I think it's kind of that tenet of horror that you don't show everything, because if you were just like, right, here's the horrible beastie, like whoop, right there, everything about it straight away, that's not very exciting. That's not very horrifying. I think it's partly leaving some things up to the imagination, because I think that the person's imagination or what is horrifying to them is going to be the best at kind of coming up with just the worst thing they can imagine. So kind of just hinting towards things in that way, I think, and just letting the imagination build, I think can be very scary. And then also in terms of sort of, I don't know, just senses and knowledge, you just kind of want to just drip feed it a bit, don't you? I think the constant drip can be a bit more disturbing over time than just gush of water,
Especially
I
if it
think
escalates slowly.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I think I like that idea of don't tell them everything. Let their imagination fill in horrible things.
And also give them moments of doubt about it as well. It's sort of, you heard something dragging across the floorboards up above, or maybe it was just the house settling, but you'll find out in time.
Yeah, I mean,
Classic. Was that a human scream or a fox scream?
Yeah.
You could even give your players an obsession with something horrific, like the smell of something like vomit. They seem to enjoy the smell of vomit.
Oh God,
that sort of thing. That sort of thing. And play on that.
Well, I think that is a perfectly disgusting note upon which to end this discussion. Thank you, Graeme. No. That was a compliment. That was a compliment. Okay. Well, then I would like to thank you all very much for joining the discussion and those fantastic insights. And thank you very much to everyone who joined us and watched and listened. And all of those of you in the future who will watch this recorded on YouTube.
Smell it.
Thank you again. Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.